It's Tarot Tuesday once again. My name is Shannon Douglas, and we've been at this for a while. Today, in our exploration of the Major Arcana, we have arrived at the number 21 card, the World. And this is a huge culmination week with respect to the Major Arcana cards. This is a card about integration of everything that we've explored in the various stages of the Major Arcana. The first phase, from the Magician through the Hermit, the transition through the Wheel of Fortune, and then the second phase of the Major Arcana of Justice through Judgment, which we covered off last week. Now, the World card is often associated with the end of a cycle and the beginning of another. This ties very closely, of course, to any of the suits in the Minor Arcana, where we begin with the Ace and we see a narrative arc of experience and development up through the number 10 card, the 10 card representing the beginning of the next wheel. And at one point in my exploration of tarot, I did point out, and you probably realize, that people associate the word tarot or tarot with an anagram of rota, which is R-O-T-A. It means wheel. And this is visible in the Wheel of Fortune card, as we see over here. And when we reach the number 21 card, we are at the culmination of a major cycle. There are many minor cycles in our lives, but this is the culmination of a major one. And I've mentioned over the last number of weeks in our exploration of the cards leading up to this, that human beings go through processes of development and stages of development. And there are many, many language sets and symbolic sets that represent the stages of development that we as human beings go through. And our modern psychology is finally caught up with some mystical tradition and esoteric teachings throughout history to recognize that there are stages of development in adulthood. Up until only a couple of decades ago in the West, the field of psychology and developmental psychology really only recognized development up until the completion of adolescence and the entering of adulthood. And we figured once we got there, home free. But that's not the case. We get into significant cycles of development in our adulthood. So briefly outlining, of course, we have our life as an infant, as we're kind of processing the physical body and introducing or getting connected to the world around us. We see this in the early cards of the Major Arcana, the Magician and the High Priestess. If we're thinking about an individual's journey through the cycles of life, represent mom and dad, and are the archetypes of mom, mother, and father, or pattern and matter. And then we move into the larger archetypes of masculine and feminine in the Empress and the Emperor. We move into the rules, the culture, the mores, the structures of society itself. And then we start to get into our teenage years, the awakening of our individuated self, beginning with the bifurcation of the conscious and unconscious mind. Up until about 5 or 6 years old, we really are unconsciously running patterns. Our ego, our personality, our persona has not developed yet. Then we start to get into the Lover's card at number 6, the Chariot card, where we have start to differentiate parts of the self. The Strength card, where we start to test our boundaries in our teenage years, and the Hermit card is the formed individual. Then in the upper parts, or the second phase of the Major Arcana, we get into some of the events and processes that we experience in adulthood. These are structural patterns of our existence. We could maybe say the games that we play and the impacts of choices that we make in our lives, and the patterns that we run. So we get up to the World card, and we have here the image of what's called the Vesica Pisces, the wreath surrounding the goddess figure here, let's say, is a perpetual cyclical process that we all experience, and surrounding the goddess and surrounding the wreath and this Vesica Pisces, which I'll come back to in a minute, we have the bull or the minotaur in the bottom. We have the lion, we have the man, and we have the eagle. These are four symbols of alchemy, corresponding to the four processes of alchemy, let's say, but they represent our capacities, let's say. The bull, our passion and drive; the lion, our strength and courage; the man, the intellect and reason; and the eagle, the vision and connection to spirituality. And if we compare this, I'm going to just flip over to the Wheel of Fortune card. We see the same figures surrounding the Wheel of Rota, where we see each of these figures in angelic form, or as aspirational to us at that point, whereas when we get to the number 21 card, these are integrated in the individual. This parallels maybe a little bit to the Lover's card structure, where we have the angel in the background, we have the conscious mind, we have the unconscious mind, and the relationship between the three. The angelic form representing the higher self and our potential and our potentialities. So when we see a figure, or these figures in the Wheel of Fortune card, all with wings, they seem to be taking in knowledge. We can assume that's a process of development. And then when we reach the World card, these figures are not winged. They're not represented as angelic anymore. It's like we reach that plateau in a transcendent space, and we can actualize enlightenment. Enlightenment is a packed word. It has different meanings in different spiritual practices and religious traditions, and even scientific endeavors. The word enlightenment is applied to a phase of our rational realization. This enlightenment is the enlightenment of the individual. It's the embodiment of the higher self. So along the process, at each stage of development, from being infants to being children to being adolescents to being adults, parents, elders, the higher self is always a representative of the next phase of our evolution. It represents our potentiality. And this World card is the fulfillment of our potentiality. So there is a philosopher that I follow, and he founded a school of thought. He's still alive. He lives in Boulder, Colorado. His name is Ken Wilber. It's Wilber. Wilber is a fascinating thinker. He came up with the term integral theory, integral psychology, integral philosophy. And his life's work has been to integrate or show the commonality of all the philosophical, scientific, psychological, and spiritual models that exist in the world into one framework called the integral map, or the Aquil map. And so anytime we're looking at a practice that shows a teleology or a developmental direction, it quite easily cross maps over to other practices. I was awakened to this in my explorations following a major psychic transformation and experience I had when I was in my mid-20s. In a book by a fascinating writer and thinker and spiritual influencer, let's say, by the name of Carolyn Myss. Her last name is spelled M-Y-S-S, and she wrote a book called The Anatomy of the Spirit. And in The Anatomy of the Spirit, she made the comparison, or she showed the analogs between three disciplines or three disparate practices. One, the 7 virtues and the 7 deadly sins in the Christian Western tradition. Another, the 10 Sephira of the Kabbalah, which we see as a significant influence in tarot. The 10 Sephira show a 10-stage, actually a 7-level developmental stage for human beings. Perfected, this is called the Adam Kadmon, or the Eve Kadmon, the perfected self, when we can actualize all 10 Sephira in our own experience. And the third being the 7 chakras of the Hindu tradition and the developmental stages through 7 categories. Now, tarot is no different from this. It describes the ascension of the soul and consciousness through a process which culminates in the World card. Now, the Vesica Pisces, which I mentioned earlier, that's that oval shape. If we go back all the way to the beginning, the Fool card, we see the number 0. And it is not a mystery or a coincidence as to why the Fool or the Joker has the number 0 in the deck. It exists as a representative of the universe, the whole, but also it exists outside of the numerical sequences. It is the part of us that travels through the developmental process. And then when we reach the World card, we see this 0 reiterated or reimagined in the card itself as the enlightened connectedness of the universe. Now, Ken Wilber talked about a number of these different stages, a number of the different psychic and psychological processes that we go through as we develop, and some of the first transpersonal experiences that become accessible to us as we're navigating through this ascension or ascending transformative alchemical process of life. And many traditions represent a certain aha or illumination or as a connection with the divine. And Jacob's ladder, the biblical story where Jacob is sleeping in the desert, his head on a rock as a pillow, and this fiery ladder comes down and he's taken up to heaven, is a representation of one of these transformative experiences. The philosopher and psychologist Carl Jung talked about this in a very famous lecture about the archetypes of UFOs, angels in ascension, sprites and spirits that take us or we perceive and symbolize, which take us to another transcendent level of experience. Wilber points out that the first phase of this is very often what could be described as a realization of a oneness, in the sense of the Buddhist notion of oneness with the goddess. It's not a full enlightenment. It is a process of recognizing our deep and transcendent connection as part of the Gaia complex. It is distinctly feminine in its power, and it is a contact with this goddess energy, largely that we in the West have been disconnected from because of the monotheistic structures that we're embedded in. And the World card, not coincidentally, I believe, it shows or demonstrates this goddess within the Vesica Pisces. She has two of the wands that belong to the magician in the beginning. These represent the as above and so below connections, and we see then the integrated images and archetypes of these 4 alchemical symbols. And in this we have this connection with the world, with the earth, with the goddess. And it is a deeply profound and transformative enlightenment that people have the capacity to go through. It may involve dreams, what we would call visions, hallucinations, a shift in our framework of perceiving reality. Now that sounds airy-fairy, out there kind of thing, but if you imagine a child, a prepubescent child who is negotiating the concrete world, figuring out what's called, I think it's called object permanence is earlier. How do we call it? In any case, a child, say at the age of 10, is figuring out the material world and its relationship to the material world in the objective, concrete operational space. To move from that mode of being not only involves the natural development of hormones around sexual maturity and development and becoming fertile, but a psychic and psychological process of transformation. And as we're leaving adolescence, we similarly go through a process of transcending the lower orders of structures. They still become part of our neurological, psychic framework, but we transcend into adulthood where the rules are different, where the space that we perceive is different. The relationships that we have with others take on a different and additional dimensions. And then when we become parents, we go through another transformative process. When we go through a process when the kids leave home, another massive psychological, even physiological shift. Women, of course, go through menopause. And men, I can speak for myself and other men that I know at a certain age. I'm about to turn 50, which I've mentioned many times. My kids have left home. Our kids have all gone on. We're empty nesters now. And our life takes on another transformative dimension. So at each of these stages, we have a major transition of cycle in our lives. And the World card represents largely, maybe we could call it a penultimate or one of those major significant changes. If we think of this wheel turning, we could think of the World card as the transformational moment that we go through when we shift from any of these stages, major transformative stages in life, to the next. In order to move out of that space, the old rules have to break down. If we are constantly in a state of equilibrium, nothing changes. There has to be movement, and that's what this Vesica Pisces represents, like the Wheel of Fortune, like the zero in the Fool card. And by the way, Vesica Pisces was incorporated into Christian symbolism as the symbol of the fish at the beginning of the age of Pisces. But if you, as I had the privilege of been in the presence of a child coming into the world, I was there for both my kids, the Vesica Pisces also represents the birth canal and the crowning of the vagina as a child comes into the world. It forms this shape, and it also forms parts of the deepest symbolism and most prolific symbolism that we have around the world around fertility, procreation, and regenerative power of the goddess. So this process of order and stability requires an instability in order to move it from one phase to the next. The old rules have to break down. Then you can think of it this way. In order for us to walk or run, we have to be off balance. Our body tilts forward and our legs keep us from falling forward. Mathematically and in Newtonian physics, this is the same idea or concept that keeps satellites in orbit. Satellites are continually falling. But they don't fall from the sky. They fall at the same rate as the Earth curves. So they have enough speed going forward that they're constantly falling. They're pulled by Earth's gravity, but because of their forward momentum, they continue to orbit in a stable format. That forward motion, that forward momentum that we have is inherently unstable. Another way of thinking about this perhaps is modern jet fighters, particularly hypersonic and supersonic military fighters, are inherently unstable, and it's the computer systems and flight control systems that keep them stable. They're inherently unstable because it allows them to react very quickly. So when the computer kind of lets go, then we have a bank or a turn, and it's not actually we're moving into a turn, we let go of stability, and then we have transformation or change. And at each stage we go through this chaotic process, and as we're moving into that next level, if I revisit the Judgment card from last week a little bit on this, the Judgment card has, and this has kind of stuck with me all week because I'm not sure I mentioned it, has implicit in it that we have to let go of the early stages or the earlier stages that we existed in, those rules of order that existed at a lower level of our consciousness. They become like, childlike activities, or, acting like a teenager, or acting like someone in the dating world. As we move through each stage, we have to kind of die to that previous way of being in many senses, and allow a part of us to die and another part of us to be resurrected or to come to life as we move into the next stage. Wow. What do you think about this? I'd be curious, now that we've gone through a big part of this journey together, what your experiences have been. How do you read the World card as it comes up, and does this make sense to you? Over the next few weeks, I'm going to revisit the early archetypes of the Major Arcana. I'm going to tackle the Fool distinctly, Magician, Priestess, Empress, Emperor, to place them more in the context of tarot and the archetypes and developmental stages than I did in the first round of this. I originally thought I took a run at the Major Arcana starting a year ago, and I tried to do it in a way that didn't actually name tarot and didn't actually name Arcana and didn't actually name the archetypes themselves. I wanted to create a character that went through basically a heroic journey and encountered these different stages and some metaphysical structures that went along with it. I felt that was a little too complicated, also terrible for online marketing if we're trying to get people who have an interest in these kinds of things to connect to it. So probably before, I may complete this by the end of the year, at least the first run of the Major Arcana. And I've got some other business projects that I'm working on that have to do with some of these major life transitions in my normal suit-wearing workaday world. I work in the financial services business. I'm a money manager and have been for a lot of years, and I'm developing a program for people who are approaching the age of 50. I'll have an ebook coming out shortly, the 10 questions you need to ask yourself about retirement before you turn 50. Inherently, if you're following this and understand this, the archetypes of this, we're talking about the transition from that parental phase into the next phase of our adult life, being elders and being grandparents and what all of that means, as well as the financial machinery and structures that we need to have around us in the world that we live in order to successfully and in a way that we can be secure with our financial futures. My name is Shannon Douglas. I'm the author of Chasing Quicksilver, which I hope to publish early in the new year. And this has been, once again, Tarot Tuesdays, The World.